Everybody ready to get started? All right, so this is the last talk of the day. Before I get started, we do have the after party. Remember, after this, that's I think we can hang out until around 8 o'clock. The first 2 hours of that is host bar, so beer and wine is on us. And we have a lot of food, so please stay and eat. We have, I think, 17 different food baskets, which is all kinds of snacks and stuff. So stick around, have a drink, eat the snacks. Of course, we'll have the magician working the crowd, which should be interesting. So yeah, should be a fun time. Yeah, so I'll get started with my talk. A little bit about, Laravel over the last year. Of course, has been really busy. We've released a lot of stuff. Since the last Laracon, I guess, I brought on Laravel's first full-time employee. That's Mohammed, who is in Egypt. And he's got a lot done. He wrote the Forge API. He upgraded Forge to the latest Laravel, actually, as well, kind of behind the scenes. Upgraded Envoyer and has of course, managed a lot of GitHub issues. Laravel itself has continued to grow really quickly. It's the most downloaded framework on Packagist on a daily basis and super active on GitHub. And what's really cool is a lot of the new features, and some of them that I show today actually, were contributed by people like you, community members that are contributing really cool features, actually, substantial features to the framework, which is really nice. And I'll try to call those out, as I go through some of these and give them props for what they've added to the framework. So in this talk, I'm just going to go through some of the new 5.5 stuff and some of the other stuff I've been working on and just kind of give you a little tour of what's coming. And so 5.5, kind of as far as schedule goes, because I get asked that a lot, is typically release the framework at like Laracon EU. So we're kind of in the last few weeks of the release cycle. It came out, 5.3 came out at Laracon EU last year. And then 5.4 came out in around January, February, and 5.5 will come out in August around Laracon EU. But of course, most of the features are done and kind of just in a stabilization phase. So let's jump right into it. Let's see, I've got my notes here so I don't lose track. The first thing I wanted to show you is, of course, we had Evan here earlier talking about Vue. And Vue ships, support for Vue components ships with Laravel Mix, of course, so that you can have single file Vue components out of the box. With Laravel 5.5, though, since the JavaScript ecosystem is super diverse, and there's a lot of different sort of opinions on what people want to do there, we do have React presets now. So, for example, if I open, let me adjust my terminal size a bit. But if I'm in, a fresh Laravel project, like this folder that we're looking at, I can just do artisan preset React, and everything will be swapped out. And now instead of like an example Vue component, I have an example.js, which is a React component. And it's all sort of set up the same way, basically, but it's just swapping out Vue for React, and then you can run npm install and kind of be on your way. And then some people don't want React, they want nothing at all, no starting point, because they kind of have their own custom thing, or they're using some other framework that we don't really have like a preset for. So in that case, you can do artisan preset none, which will sort of get rid of basically everything and leave you with a blank app SAS file. And it still does leave you with Axios, the HTTP library for making like AJAX requests. So you still have that, but that's basically it out of the box. So from there, you're basically on your own to start out your own project, and there's no JavaScript scaffolding or anything really out of the box except a blank SAS file and Mix and an HTTP library. So I just wanted to call that out real quick because, just a few new options on the front end side of things. Let's jump back into my routes file. There's a couple new routing options, and these were contributed by Christopher Bray. So one of them is this new method called route view, where if you just want to return a view from a route, you don't actually have to create a controller or a route function anymore. You can just say route view, the path, and then the path to the view. So in this case, I'm saying I want the welcome route to just return the welcome view. And so if I hit that in my browser, of course, I just get the same page, the welcome view. And this works with route caching as well, so it's actually hitting a controller behind the scenes. So if you use this function, you can still use PHP Artisan route cache. Another new function is, and this is just an example that you can also pass data to route view if you have some data you want to pass into it. Another function is route redirect. So some people want to redirect like old URIs to new URIs. Route redirect lets you do that again without creating a controller or an anonymous route. So I just have a redirect that redirects from here route to there route, and when you hit the there route, it just returns, you are there, so we can see that it's being redirected. And if we hit that, we can just see that we did get redirected. So those are just little shortcuts and helpers to make you or let you avoid writing controllers or routes when you really don't need them. All right, Blade if. I thought this was a pretty cool feature that was contributed recently by a community member. And what it lets you do is a lot of times when you write a custom Blade directive, which was sort of hard to do and a little cumbersome, this kind of solves the most common use case for that functionality, which is writing a custom if statement. So in this example, I'm saying I want to define a custom Blade statement called local, and whenever it's like in my template, I want you to call this callback, and that's going to return true or false. And it kind of works like a custom if. So let me show you what it looks like in the template. So this is what the registration looks like. It's just going to return true if the environment is local. And then in my template, which is this environment.blade, I have the ability to just say at local, else, end local, just like an if statement. So this will only be shown if we're in the local environment, and of course, this means we're not in the local environment. So in my end file, I am in the local environment. So if we hit this route /blade, you can see that I am in the local environment. And if I were to change that to be, some other environment, then I'm not in the local environment. So it's just a really quick way, a really expressive way to register those custom Blade if statements. I thought that was another really cool feature that was contributed by the community. All right, so that's Blade if. Another really feature I've really enjoyed is this renderable mailables. So a lot of times if you're working on an email view and you're just kind of trying to get the view right or the HTML right, you have to kind of like send it to yourself and look at it. And there was no really easy way to just like render it without having to send it somewhere. So now you can just define like a little test route and just return a mailable just like straight from the route, and it will just display in the browser for you. So if I hit this mailable route, I just get the email and I can kind of, eyeball it and mess with it right here in the browser without having to send an email. There's a few other things this similar concept applies to. So one of them is exceptions. So previously, if you had an exception that you wanted to display like a custom error page for, you would have had to do some like funky syntax in your exception handler where you come into the render method and you're like, if exception instance of something, and it's just like hairy nastiness. But now in 5.5, right on your exception, so I have this custom exception called just bad exception in app exceptions, and I can actually put those report and render methods right on the exception. So it just sort of helps me encapsulate like what's going to happen when that exception is thrown. So in this case, I'm just going to throw a 500 level response for this like custom errors view that I have out in my resources views file. And now when a route throws this exception, this is what will actually be rendered. And I can have custom reporting logic. And this is sort of either or, so you can not have this and like only have render, or you could only have report and not have render, just kind of whatever you need. So if I hit that route, of course, I'm going to get my custom exception screen that something is really badly wrong. It's just another way to sort of avoid that if check instance of nastiness in your exception handler. All right, and kind of also on a related note, there's this new interface called responsible, which kind of is a weird looking word. Looks like it's misspelled or whatever. But it's a really simple interface that you can put on any of your classes, and it just dictates that you need to define a toResponse method. So like, this is just a proof of concept of how you could use this interface, because the foundation of the framework doesn't really use it yet. We're just kind of putting it out there because I think it will serve as a good foundation for the future for doing some interesting things. So this is sort of a proof of concept where you could kind of build an API transformation layer by making yourself an app HTTP responses directory and then having, for example, in this case, a user response where I'm going to pass in like an eloquent user. And if I look at that user response, this toResponse can be responsible for dictating how do we transform this user eloquent model into like a JSON response. And this is kind of like what you would use Fractal for. You might even call Fractal like within here. But what it lets you do is you can return any responsible implementation from a route. So it lets you build pretty expressive routes where you're just returning these objects like user response. And some people like to, because I don't really like having like responder or like transformer. It's like I would rather just return a response from the route because I think that just is better kind of semantically. So when I return this, that is rendered using the toResponse method. So I'm just putting this in 5.5 to let you play with and sort of see what you can come up with, because I think people can build some pretty cool API layers with it, or maybe some libraries that start out as packages. And sort of as we explore API transformations like in the core of the framework, this is sort of like the bottom most foundational piece, I think, going forward. So play with that and see what you think about it. This is something Mohammed contributed, one-off notifications. So in 5.4, we have notifications, of course, which lets you send mail and Slack notifications or SMS notifications. And you had to actually have a user like in your system that you could call user notify on. But sometimes in applications, and I've had this case myself where I want to send a notification, but I don't actually have like the user in my system. I just have like their email, or I have a phone number or whatever. And I want to leverage the notification system. So now we have what's called like one-off notifications or anonymous notifications, where I can just say notification route and provide like the routing information per driver. And I can sort of have multiple calls to this if I needed to, like that. And once I provide the email, I can just say notify just like I would any other user in my database. Okay, so when I hit this, it should send an invoice paid notification to like my email. And I'm using Mailtrap here to sort of capture those emails. So when I hit the notification route, you can see that we got that email. So it's just an easy way to send notifications to people that aren't in your system. All right, this is some new validation rule stuff that was sort of Adam Wathen's brainchild that he explained to me over Telegram, and we kind of pair programmed together one day. But I think it's a much easier way to do more complex validation rules, custom rules. So in this example, I have a little form that we want to validate if a given GitHub repository is a valid GitHub repository. So to do that, we obviously need to make like an API call to GitHub and see if it exists out there. And so what it looks like is I define a new rule class, and there's a new make rule artisan command. And the rules only have two methods. So in this case, I have passes and I have message. So passes only needs to return true or false. And it receives the value, the attribute name, and the value. And I can do whatever I want in here. I can call some other like service class, or I can do the HTTP call directly. And then the message just returns the error message that you want to be displayed when this rule fails. So here, I'm just returning a hard-coded message, but of course you could return a translated message or whatever you wanted to do there. All right, and so how you actually specify the rule is where I have this repository field, I'm just saying required string, and then I just pass an instance of the rule. That's all I need to do. And of course, since you're passing in an instance, you have sort of control over the constructor to pass in any dependencies or whatever you need there. All right, and then that will just be run like any other rule using that passes method. So if I hit that route and type in, just some garbage repository, it runs the rule. Or if I put in a valid repository, it was validated, and I can see like my validated data. So I think it's a pretty clean way of defining custom rules that doesn't require you to do like validator : extend and have like a function callback. You can just sort of have this nice, tidy object that you pass into the validator. All right, so that's thanks to Adam on that one. All right, let's see. Proxies, trusted proxies. So Chris Fidel has a package out there, Fideloper/trusted proxy. Have anyone ever used that before? Okay, so some of you. So when you might need this, I have an example of when you might need this package. So say you have a server out on DigitalOcean, which I do, and I'm running on this domain I don't use called fistbump.io. But I'm running this on, so this is a DigitalOcean server on Forge, and I have Cloudflare in front of it, and I'm using Cloudflare's free kind of flexible SSL where I don't have to have a certificate on my actual server. And so that's fine. Like you can see I have the green lock and everything. But if I hit this proxy route, which is just going to make a URL to another page, and I hit that route, we would normally expect that URL to be generated with an HTTPS in the link, but we can see here it actually used an HTTP, which we didn't expect and would cause like errors on our page, like mixed content errors. And the reason for that is because Cloudflare, your connection to Cloudflare is secure, but your connection between Cloudflare and DigitalOcean is not secure when you're using that flexible option sometimes. And so your app thinks it's running on port 80 and it's just an unsecured app. So we need a way to say, hey, you're actually a secure app and you need to act like you're secure and generate HTTPS links. And so in Laravel 5.5, we just sort of integrated Chris Fidel's packages right in. So there's a new middleware in the default structure where if I go to HTTP middleware, there's a new trust proxies. And here you have a few different ways of specifying this. So by default, it sort of looks like that, where there's just nothing. And we specify what headers are forwarded from Cloudflare or whatever other proxy you're using. Or you could specify it kind of like this, where you would just want to trust all proxies that forward you information. If for some reason you just aren't able to know all the IP addresses. Or you could have like an array of IP addresses right here, if you know them all, kind of like that or whatever. Okay, so if I change this, I'm just going to accept everything in this case, and then go to my Laracon demo and just push that up real quick. And I think Forge is just auto-deploying that. And now if we start generating these links, you can see now they generate with HTTPS like they should. So that's a pretty common scenario if you're running behind a load balance or anything like that, and common enough I thought that it warranted just sort of being configurable right in the default app. So for those of you that need that, that's hopefully a welcome change. All right, so that's trusted proxies. Okay, migrate fresh. This is a really cool new command where previously, like say you wanted to reset your whole database, like your database is messed up or the schema's all out of whack or whatever, and you just sort of need to refresh everything. Previously you might have to do like artisan migrate. I think it was actually called refresh or in seed or something like that. And what that would do is roll back every migration and then roll all the way forward. And sometimes that works, but sometimes your schema or your migrations are broken to such like an extent that you can't roll back properly. So now you have to like open SQL Pro or open whatever database tool you're using manually, like delete all the tables, it's just a mess. But now there's a new migrate fresh command, which instead of rolling back all your migrations, it just drops all the tables immediately and then just migrates forward. So it's a lot cleaner. And of course, that supports the seed option too. I don't have any seeds in this little simple app, but you can pass that in. So that's a really useful new command. And that's inspired by Freak, who gave the first talk of the day. He had a package that did that. And we sort of leverage that in our test stuff, which I want to show you. So I have this database test file that just creates a new post model using the model factory and then asserts that the name is not null. Okay, and if I just run this file, this passes. All right, now I'm using the database transaction trait, which will start a new transaction for each test, which is one of the default traits in Laravel 5.4 for tests. Now, this can bite you in some situations because say I come into my post factory and I add a new column And I do the same thing in my, my migration because I'm adding, the number of upvotes, let's say this post has received. All right, so I've added this column in my migration in my factory. And now when I run this test, the test fails because the column doesn't exist in my actual database, my testing database. I only added it in my files, and I forgot to migrate. So this was sort of just kind of a dumb situation where you always had to remember to migrate your database and your test database and make sure it's always up to date. Or you could use the database migrations trait, which sort of re-migrated everything, and that would kind of work, but it's just a lot slower. And so again, Adam and I kind of talked about it would be nice to have this trait where it just did the most logical option. And we came up with this new refresh database trait, which is actually the only trait in 5.5 by default. The other traits are still there for backwards compatibility, but going forward, this is pretty much what you would always want to use. And what it does is it always makes sure your database is up to date, and then it starts a transaction for each test. So it's kind of the best of both worlds of not having to remember to migrate and then being quicker. So now if I run this test, you can see the test passed because it made sure my database was up to date first. So that's how we're kind of leveraging migrate fresh in the test to make it just a cleaner setup all around. So definitely check out refresh database when you start using 5.5. This routing test I want to show you shows another new testing feature. So this is another common use case where I have this little test that calls this get exception route, and I assert that the status is 200. Now, if I look at this route, I don't know where it is, but it just throws an exception. Okay, and if I try to run this route, I get the exception, which of course I told you was going to happen, but I don't really get any useful information about what happened. It just says I expected 200 but received 500. And to sort of debug this test, I would have to go into my log and look at what went wrong or whatever and try to find it. But now there's a new method in your test you can do called without exception handling. So I can disable exception handling for this test file so that all the exceptions just kind of bubble up all the way to the top to PHP unit. And now if I run it, it of course still fails, but I at least get eventually some kind of exception, that some bad exception happened. So that's been really useful for me as I've been building apps in 5.5 already to be able to get more useful information out of my test. So if you're getting that error and you see 500 instead of 200, this method will help you get to the bottom of what's happening. All right, Dusk. So there's new Dusk features, and the new feature is this right here. Let's see if it works. Where it doesn't pop open a browser by default every time, so it's headless by default. So this is using Chrome's new headless option, and I've heard it's a lot quicker on bigger Dusk test cases. So this is sort of the new default in Dusk 2.0, which will release with Laravel 5.5. As you no longer have the browser sort of popping up. And of course you can disable that if you still want the browser. It's just a simple little flag change. All right, package discovery. So this is a big new feature that Dries and I worked on. Dries, who manages Laravel.io. And this is a really cool new feature where I'm sure you've installed a package and you immediately had to register the service provider, register their facades. Well, you no longer actually have to do that in Laravel 5.5. And if you look at, for example, the Dusk, let's see if we can pull up the Dusk composer.json. So you can see it has this new section called Laravel in the extra section where I'm specifying what providers this package provides. And things like Tinker and Trusted Proxy, they all have these blocks too. And anytime you install a package, behind the scenes, we have this hook to run artisan package discover. And that discovers all those packages and registers their service providers in the right spot for you, in between the framework providers and your own provider, so that you have the opportunity to override any of these packages services. So now, most of the time when I install a package, I don't really have to do anything. If I install Laravel debug bar, I just do composer acquire berry vdh/Laravel debug bar. It downloads it, it registers the service provider, and I'm good to go. I don't have to do anything in my configuration file. So packages are auto-discovered. And then also related to packages, the vendor publish menu, we now have a nice like readout of what packages you can actually publish and tags and things like that. So I can just pick one or publish all of them. And it's a lot more user-friendly and easier to see what you're doing. Auto-registered console commands. So previously, if you created a console command, you would have to come into this console kernel and register it, like some class. That's no longer the case in 5.5. This is a contribution from Mohammed, where if I just make a console command, artisan make command something, and it generates this command, and I'll just write out some information. Command ran, and now I haven't registered anything, and I should just be able to do, I need to set my signature up here though. So set the command signature. I haven't actually registered it, and I can just run that command immediately. I don't need to list it all in my kernel anymore. All right, so just several things now are just sort of auto-registered for you, which I think makes everything just go a little smoother, the developer experience is better, things like that. All right, so that is the auto-registered commands. Job chaining. So this is a new queue feature where I can dispatch a job and then specify I want other jobs to run subsequently to that job. So in this example, I'm queuing the perform task job, and then I'm calling the new chain method and giving it an array of jobs I want to run, like in a chain. So this will run perform task, and if that's successful, it will run another task, and if that's successful, it will run final task, just in a line. And of course, I can pass eloquent models or anything I want to that, and they'll all be serialized how you expect and re-retrieved. All right, so if I start up a queue worker and then hit that route, we'll see that the first task runs, the second task runs, the final task runs. So it's a really nice way to sort of build just a line of queue jobs, which isn't every app you build, but it is common enough to sort of warrant including, and I think it's been really helpful for me already. All right, so that is job chaining. And another queue feature I want to show you is related to missing models. So I think I have an example of the previous behavior of this in this missing model demo, where if I have this job, and if I look at the job, it has this high number of attempts that I want it to attempt for. So this job can attempt 50 times before it's supposed to just cancel out. And in this case, I'm passing in a user model. Okay, and if you look at my route, I'm going to make a new user, dispatch the job, and put a delay on it for 5 seconds, but then I'm going to delete the user. So the user that this job was related to no longer exists. And so what would happen in the past is something like this. Start up a queue worker. I think I have this at missing.dev or something like that. Let me see if it goes through here. Usually takes a second. Yeah, there it is. So you can see it actually tries to perform the job 50 times before it finally fails, even though the model does not even exist anymore in your database, which I felt like was kind of stupid behavior and clogs up your log files or like your bug tracker. And so in Laravel 5.5, this has been modified a bit. So now if I dispatch a job that has a missing model and that model is missing, it will just fail the first time. So I'm kind of doing the same situation where I'm dispatching the job and then deleting the user. So now if I run a queue worker here, hit Laracon dev, missing model, you can see it only ran just one time and then failed because it saw, hey, this model doesn't exist anymore, so there's no point in trying 500 times to run this job. All right, and there's a property related to this on this job where maybe I don't even want it to fail. I just want it to delete the job entirely if the model is missing, because I don't even care about those errors, because I sort of expect them to happen in some situation. So I can say delete when missing models equals true, and now if I restart this queue worker, queue a job, it just looks like it processed, but really it just deleted immediately, basically. So that kind of cleans up your log and error handling. All right, let me switch notes here. All right, so I want to clear my queue just to make sure this is all fresh. All right, so for the next part of the talk, I want to talk about a new package I've been working on, which is Laravel Horizon. And it is queue related, and I think augments queues to how I sort of always wanted them to be, and how what I needed sort of for myself, sort of scratching my own itch again. So I'm going to switch over to Horizon demo. And Horizon is sort of multiple things. One, it's a really nice admin dashboard for queues that gives you a lot of information about what's going on. It's also a new way to configure queues in your code. So you know how kind of we moved cron management into the code with a console kernel scheduler, where you kind of define your jobs in source control and in your code? I feel like that's kind of similar to what Horizon is doing with some stuff, where I have a config file when I install Horizon called config Horizon, and I can actually configure my queue options in the code. So I can say, how many processes do I want for this queue? How many maximum tries? What queue should it work? What connection should it use? And right now, Horizon we're just doing Redis right now because we're kind of like just getting it going. But of course, we could support other queue drivers as well. But I feel like Redis is sort of it's all around sort of our best driver because it's the most scalable, cheaply in most cases. And it doesn't have deadlock issues like the relational database driver, and it's free, unlike the cloud-based drivers. It's local, you own it, but it's also heavily scalable because you can hook it to like Elasticache on AWS and stuff like that. So that's what I'll be using to demo it. So I can configure all this in my code, and I can change this to 20 processes or whatever I want, and then to start it up, all I do is run artisan Horizon if I'm in the right folder. And that's going to read that config file and start up everything just how I specified it. So this is going to auto refresh, and I can see that I have 2 queues here, each with 10 processes because I have a simple balancing strategy, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And this is the machines that I have queue workers on. So Defiant is just like the host name for my MacBook, and that's just like a random identifier for this sort of Horizon session. And I can see what queues it's working, how many processes it has, and stuff like that. So this is sort of my overall workload dashboard of what's going on with my queues. All right. And there's a couple other commands I'll show you real quick while I'm doing this, where I'm going to shut it down, start it back up. And I can do stuff like artisan Horizon pause, where I can just pause the queue worker on this machine. I can do stuff like artisan continue to tell it to continue processing jobs. I think this dashboard updates like every 5 seconds or so. Or I can send like a Horizon terminate signal to gracefully stop the Horizon worker on this machine, so this won't lose any active jobs, and we'll shut down that Horizon worker. So that's the command you would run, like if you were making a fresh deploy and like say supervisors managing your Horizon command, and you deploy, you call Horizon terminate, shuts down those, starts up fresh Horizon workers. All right, so I'm going to start this back up for now. And I'm just going to kind of walk through all the features of Horizon and kind of explain them as I go. So let's start with this recent job list maybe. And in this application that's using Horizon, I have some routes to just sort of dispatch jobs out onto the queue. So if I come to, I'll just stay on my dashboard for now and dispatch 5 jobs out onto the queue. And we can see that we had 5 jobs in the past hour and sort of how many jobs per minute we're running. We can see what queue currently has the max runtime, is taking the longest to process jobs. What queue has the max throughput, sort of the busiest queue right now. And you can see down here, we can also see the wait time for each queue. So right now, we have basically nothing on the queue, so the wait time is just a few seconds. So if I come into my recent job list, I can see all the jobs that have run recently. And I can dispatch out, like let's dispatch maybe 30 jobs out here. And we'll see them completing live, how long they took to run, stuff like that. So we have good insight into all this. And we can paginate through our jobs. If we have a lot of jobs, there's pagination down here where we can kind of dig through. Now, you may have noticed this tags column, which is currently empty. And this is one of my favorite features in Horizon. I can categorize my jobs by tags. So let's take a look at that job I just queued. Or actually, I have a different job called render video. That's just going to pick a random video out of my database, which I already have seeded. I've just got it seeded with 5 fake videos. We're going to dispatch this render video job, and it has this tags method at the bottom where I can return an array of tags. So I'm going to say video colon and then whatever the video ID is. All right, and this job is just going to sleep for 1 second. So let me go ahead and dispatch that job. And we have render video, and you can see in my tags column I have video colon 2. And what's nice is I can monitor these by tag. So if I come to the monitoring tab and I say I want to monitor all jobs with this tag, video colon 2. And now I'm going to just dispatch out some, so I get some more because they're just randomly picking them. See, I haven't got another 2 yet. Let me see. Still not getting 2s. Okay, there's a couple 2s. So those ran, and now I can see I have 2 jobs that it kind of picked up on. And this lets me, say a customer emails me and they're saying, hey, I'm having problems with this invoice, or this is my, they email you and you find their user ID and you say, okay, I'm going to monitor this user. I put in maybe, whatever tag they are. And now I'm just going to watch that, for the next couple hours, and I can see all the failed jobs, all their completed jobs, and sort of get better insight into what they're doing in the system, where I wouldn't really have that before. And then I can just stop monitoring those tags when I'm no longer interested in that tag. All right, now it's cool that we can specify tags. What's actually really cool, I think, is we actually don't have to have this method at all. And if we don't, Horizon will say, okay, you have a video eloquent model on your job, so it probably makes sense that you want to tag, at least add that tag to your job, so we can just auto tag jobs by your eloquent model IDs. So now I'm just automatically tagging based on eloquent models. And if I have multiple eloquent model properties, it's going to get multiple tags for each one. And now, of course, I can come in, I can monitor this by class name ID, dispatch out some more. I may actually have to, no, I didn't have to redo that, I guess. Yeah, and then we have my tags right there. So if you don't have to manually specify that, but if you do, it's going to override the auto tag. So you sort of have your choice. If the auto tag is not the behavior you want for a certain job, just define the tags manually. Or if you don't need it, just let it auto tag. All right, and this doesn't just work for jobs, so I wanted to show you an example of a few other things it works for as well. So if I go down through my routes file, this also works for queued event listeners. It works for broadcast events. It works for mailables. It works for notifications. So right here, I'm dispatching an event that's being broadcast. I think I'm just using the log driver, but you could be using Pusher or Redis. And it also has a queued listener. For I think send video rendered notification implement should queue. So this is listening for this event. Now if I hit this event route, you can see that I can see that listener. It also got auto tagged, and I can see the event. This was when events are broadcast in Laravel, they're automatically queued. So we see an event for that in our queue with the tag, and we see the listener tagged. So, and I could add tag methods to either one of those as well. So I have pretty deep customization of what I want to do here. And again, this also works for mailables. So if I hit the mail route, Horizon's going to give me some insight into what mail is being sent from my application. It's going to be tagged, so I can look into those. And of course, notifications, as I mentioned, if we send a notification. All right, so we can see those are tagged as well, and we can customize that with the tag method. All right, so that's a really great way to sort of dig in and see what's happening in your queue. So let's talk about failed jobs a little bit, which I feel like is a really I don't know how we kind of survived with what we had with failed jobs before, where you just had just console commands to interact with failed jobs. But now we have a kind of a whole screen for it. And I think I have a route to fail off a few jobs. So this route just fails. It dispatches a job that just fails every time. So I'm going to fail out a few jobs here. All right, and they just picked random videos out of the database. And what's really cool is even if I'm not monitoring this tag for failed jobs, you can still search by tag for up to 48 hours. So I can actually come in here and just search for any failed job with this tag. And because a lot of times you're not going to be monitoring beforehand, right? Like if a customer emails you and says, this didn't happen, or I didn't receive this email, and you want to dig in and see what happened, you probably weren't monitoring that tag for whatever the invoice ID or user ID or whatever it was. But you can still find it in your failed jobs because those are kept for 48 hours. So I can search for any tag here. I can actually dig into this job and see the stack trace, the tags, when it failed, and I can see any relevant data. And what I really like is one of my favorite features, because it's bitten me so much in the past, is previously if you had a failed job, you would have to do something like, go on the console, queue failed, find the ID, queue retry, type in the ID, and then you just sort of like hope that like it worked the next time. Like there's no connection between like the retry and the fail. But now if I retry a job, it's just live updating right here. They're linked together. So I can see like the recent retries for this job, whether they were successful or not. And those are in order. And I can click on these failures and sort of see, what was the exception on that one. I can go back. It's all a clean single-page application written in Vue. All right. And then, of course, let's fix it. So like if we came in here and we had this failing task and I just comment out this exception that went wrong, I'm going to restart my queue worker because, that's loaded. That's like a daemon worker. And then if I come in here, retry the job, now it's completed, so we can see, okay, great, we got the job through. So this is one of my favorite features because I felt like it was so obvious, like it should obviously be this way that I could just see like what the retries were for the failed job, so I'm glad you finally can. All right. Okay, so that's kind of the basics of failed job, and this kind of works sort of like the recent jobs where I can paginate through. The only difference is I can search tags for failed job always within 48 hours. And failed jobs are kept in here. I think it's configurable. I think the default is 7 days, that they're just automatically kind of cleared out for you after 7 days because it's not common to just go back and rerun like a 45-day job or whatever that's old. But that's configurable, how often you want that to clear and how much disk space you kind of want that to take up or whatever. And all of this is stored in Redis, all this metadata, so there's no migrations when you install Horizon. You just composer, require Laravel Horizon, and literally pull up this dashboard and it just like works. There's no migrations or anything like that. Now I want to talk about queue balancing, which I mentioned briefly earlier. Now, we could have a situation where one of our queues is a lot more overloaded than the other queue. So in this case, I'm splitting my processes 10 and 10 between default and notifications. And what can happen is, let me go ahead and uncomment that. But say I dispatch like a lot of jobs onto the default queue, and I dispatch just a few jobs onto the notifications queue, so they're like really only like 100 on notifications. What I can do is tweak my balancing settings. So the simple setting is just an even split between all my queues. I'm down here on local, sorry. Simple is just split between my queues. So default notifications, even split. So I'm going to change this to auto. And if I restart my queue worker, now we can see we're in auto mode on our balancing. And let's dispatch out, say 1,000 jobs out onto the queue. We still have a wait time of 2 minutes. And watch the process count between default and notifications here. So you guys automatically saying, oh, I've got a lot of jobs on default, but I have no jobs on notifications. Wouldn't it make sense if I move some of my spare workers over to default instead of leaving them on notifications so that I can clear the queue faster? So Horizon will intelligently balance out where your workers are allocated as it's kind of examining and it's taking into account, what's the average wait time for this queue. So it knows how long jobs are on average taking on the default queue. So it knows kind of what it can do and what's the wait time on that queue, and it's sort of balancing all the queues together that way. And so now we can see we're processing jobs a lot faster because we have 19 processes on the default queue and only 1 remaining on the notification queue, and that's going to, finish up here pretty quick. All right, so I'm going to let that finish out and clear out and show you one more thing with auto balancing. So pretty cool feature, right? Now once that's finished, you can see it's starting to rebalance out. It's starting to come back to normal because the queues are even now. So it's going to slowly kind of even things out. Now, there might be situations where it's not really like ideal that you would want only 1 worker left on your notification queue and all 19 on default. So you can specify a minimum number of processes you want to allocate to a queue. And it's real easy to do in my configuration. So I can just say min processes. Say I don't want to go below 5 processes on any queue, even if they're out of balance. So I'm just going to stick that in my configuration file, restart my Horizon, and let's do the same thing. Let's put another 1,000 jobs out there and watch how it balances. It's not going to go, it's going to look like default with 15 and notifications with 5 is the behavior we want because we don't want to go below 5 workers. All right, so it's going to start processing, start balancing those out. Again, I can see the wait time here live on my dashboard. I can see how many jobs are in the queue, what the wait time is, about a minute right now. And you can see it's not going to go past 15 processes on the default queue. All right, so that's how the min processes work with the balancing. All right, so that's auto balancing. I'll just let that finish out. Now, another feature of Horizon is notification. So it would be nice to be notified if our queue had a long wait time. And it can do this via Slack or SMS, again, because Laravel has sort of an integrated notification system. It's really easy for us to do this. So if I come into my app service provider, there's a couple different methods. Route SMS notifications to this phone number. And I can configure what I want my threshold to be. So in my Horizon config file, I have this wait time, and I'm saying that if a queue on the Redis connection default queue has longer than 60 seconds wait time, I want you to send me an SMS message and let me know that. All right, so again, if I restart my Horizon to load that fresh config, I'm going to dispatch. I'll put a couple thousand out there. And once it checks this wait time, I'm going to get an SMS notification that tells me exactly how many seconds are on this queue, what application it actually was, and which queue is backed up right now. Let's see. It checks every minute, so it should be coming in pretty soon. And again, you can just specify the Slack webhook or the SMS number or whatever you want. All right, and while I'm waiting for that to come in, let me show you how this is authenticated. So when you first install this, you can only pull up this dashboard if you're in the local environment. If you, of course, want to put authorization in front of that when you deploy this, and so you would actually just come into your app service provider, have a Horizon auth call, it receives the current request, and I can just return true or false right here and configure who can view this application and in what environment and all that. So you sort of have total control of how you want to expose the dashboard. And my phone's kind of, I guess this notification is delayed or not coming through. But I just got the notification earlier, so I know it works, and you can be Slack or SMS or whatever you want. So that lets you respond really quickly to, if one of your queues is getting backed up and you need to allocate more workers, you're going to be notified really quickly for that. All right, so let's see. Comment that out. Let me check the rest of my notes here. Oh, metrics is one of the last things to look at. So I actually have an application that's been out here and kind of running for a while. so that we have some metrics built up. So this is an application that's been running for a little bit and has just been queuing jobs every minute for like the last few weeks or whatever. And so I come out to metrics, I get really nice charts of the throughput for this job or the runtime for the job. So if I make a deploy, I can see like if my runtime's going way up after my deploy, of course I have some kind of code mistake that's making my jobs take a lot longer. I can see sort of what the throughput looks like over the last however many hours. And you can run these snapshots like a kind of whatever intervals you want. So you could run them like every 10 minutes, you could run them every 5 minutes, you could run them every minute. Because all you're doing is just scheduling the Artisan Horizon snapshot command in your scheduler, and you can just sort of control that to run whenever you want. So you could run it every minute if you wanted to, and it's going to take a metric snapshot. Now, of course, if I'm, with all this running and running live, I could update this queue configuration, and there's no more like, mucking around in supervisor and trying to gracefully shut stuff down to add more processes or add a queue or anything like that. So in this application, I could just come into it, open it up, say I want to add more throughput. I go to Config Horizon. In production, say I want to increase my processes to 20. Maybe I want to add a second queue here, change this to auto balancing strategy, delete my whole config file. Change that to the auto balancing strategy. And then all I have to do is commit that change. Let me split screen it. All right, so we had 10 and 10. And then, let me see if I can just deploy that out there like this. And we're going to see it deploy out there to I have multiple worker servers, I have a web server, and we should see it build and activate and then update my process counts as we go here. So it's still building this release, activating that release. Now we're activating, it's gracefully shutting down the workers. It's going to start up fresh workers. You can see my new settings, 20 on each, 2 queues, auto balancing. So I never had to go into any supervisor file. I never had to do anything but make a pull request on my company's repository saying, hey, we need more queue workers, bump that to 20, deploy my code. That's running Horizon terminate. It's getting booted back up, and we're good to go. We never lost any jobs. We added queue workers. All of that is good to go. All right, so that is the gist of Laravel Horizon. What do you think? It's pretty cool? So let's talk a little bit about pricing something like this. Similar products start at something like this, at $950 a year. But I thought, you know what? It'd be really cool, since Laravel is still the only full stack framework that has queues to begin with. What if we just gave Horizon away for free to everybody? And since I've been sitting on it since about April, why don't we just put it out tomorrow so everyone can start playing with it? All right, so all of Horizon, every feature, the configuration-driven stuff, the dashboard, all of that, totally open source. Vue, single-page application, all the backend's open source, so we can work on it together. I'm going to open it up on GitHub tomorrow. Of course, it's Laravel 5.5, so you'll have to sort of start a Laravel 5.5 beta download to sort of start playing with it. Yeah, we'll get it out there. The marketing page auto-launched about 20 minutes ago. I don't know if anyone found it. But yeah, you can read a little bit about it. Of course, the GitHub repo will be up tomorrow. I do want to give a few thanks to Mohammed, who worked on. I wrote the whole backend of Horizon months ago and had it all finished. And then Steve Shoger designed all the UI. He also did like the Laracon site, the Spark website. David Hemphill, who's here, he wrote all the Vue CSS layer. There he is back there. And then Mohammed sort of connected my back end with David's front end and wrote the HTTP controllers and stuff like that. It has lots of unit tests, really thoroughly tested, so we feel good about it. And I can't wait to use it more myself. I think it's going to really bring Q's up to a more professional level and give us what we need to get more insight about it. So that's Horizon, free, open source, Q dashboard, real time, open source tomorrow. And the after party, be sure to stick around. We have drinks for a couple hours. We can chat, talk about it, eat lots of food. We have lots of food baskets. If you see the magician wandering around, tell him to do a trick for you. And I'll see you in the morning. Thanks.